Welcome everyone to our discussion of Sefer Yayon. We're in the middle portion of the Sefer, where he's telling us, explaining to us the terms, statements, and syllogisms, and we're in that third part now, which is explaining syllogisms. And last week we discussed the foundation of a syllogism. He explained to us really this rule of inclusiveness. Once I have a statement and I have something included in the subject, so it's going to have the predicate. If I have something included in the predicate, it's going to have whatever the subject has. That was his basic rule, and we went through that basis. Now let's start. Second part of the chapter. He's going to now, this will be familiar to us from Dr. Gemara. I'm sorry, I jumped too quickly. What I want to do is just to show you our chart where we were holding. Terms, statements, syllogisms. Here's our syllogisms. Okay, so we haven't discussed what's on this chart. He first gave a Hagdama, a preface about how syllogism works. And now he's going to discuss three basic issues: the construction of a syllogism, how to create it, how to refute it, and then he's going to tell us to make sure that our syllogisms are correct. We have to watch out about ambiguous terms or terms that seem to be similar and they're not. Okay, so we're going to start today's class. We're going to talk about the various types of syllogisms. He's going to say there's the Hekas HaSholem, the one where it spells out all the terms, the Bilti Sholem, when some of the terms, I should say some of the statements, the premises are not mentioned, the hypotheticals, those are the if-thens, and disjunctive A or B type syllogisms. Then he'll tell us how we use syllogisms. He'll explain to us syllogisms create new ideas or bring proof to ideas that we have or statements that we have. And remember those two types of proof, the direct proof and indirect proof that we spoke about in Tunas. I'm going to come back here. Okay, so that's the little chapter we'll be dealing today. Be'ezrat Hashem. So let's go to the Sefer and look inside and see how he explains those things. So he says like this: the Hekesh HaSholem, what's called the Hekesh HaSholem? Hu asher yavohu bo shtei hagdamos hamolidos v'hatoldos shelehem. The complete Hekesh will spell out both the premises and the conclusion that comes from those premises. Derech mashal. Kol adam chai, Ruvain adam, those are two premises. And therefore, in Cain, hu ba'al chai, therefore he must be living. Okay, so all men are living things, and Ruvain is a man. Therefore, Ruvain is a living thing. He explains those three parts by giving names to them. The first part he's going to call the Noda. The second is going to be the Mashve, and the third part is called the Mavukash. Let's see how he explains that. Now, the Havchanas, he always tells us different aspects of Hekeshim. First he told us the parts, now he's going to tell us the Hekeshim, the different aspects. So he says, Havchanos, sheyesh lahavchin behekesh hasholem shalosh. When you analyze the Hekesh HaSholem, then you'll see it has three parts. The Noda, that which is known. The Mavukash, that's which you want to understand, or Machadesh. And the third one is a mashva that's going to put together the Noda and the Mavukash. She's going to spell that out, so don't worry about it. Vikorim Gedola Katana V'Tolodo. The classic names for them is the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. It's interesting that he orders it in a slightly different way. I mean, he didn't. I would have put the Mavukash at the end, and the Mashve is the middle term in the middle. It's interesting why he does that. Anyway, I don't have an answer to that. The noda hu hagdama asher yadata nosa'o u nosahu. The noda is the statement where you know both parts, the subject and the predicate. In our example, he's going to explain to us, Kol Adam Chai, all men are living things. What's the mavukash? Mavukash hu hanose asher yadata. The mavukash, what you're asking for, what you're trying to determine, is some statement that you know. But, and what's the statement? I mean, the subject you know. U tavakesh ladas nasu. You know the subject, and you want to know what the predicate is. Okay? So that's called a mavukash. Now, in order to get, I understand how we set it up now. Okay. So in our little example, Ruvain, you see, Ruvain, which is not repeated in his example here because he says Imkain who, but Ruvain is the mavukash. We want to know something about Ruvain. So we're going to say, well, if Ruvain is included in Kol Adam, then he'll have what Kol Adam has. Since Kol Adam has Chai, he'll have Chai too. So that's how he does it. Okay. So the mavukash is what you know the subject, and you want to find out what the predicate is. Okay, that would be the toldo in common language. Okay. Now I understand why he said what he said, because you have a given statement, then you have a statement whose subject you know, and you want to find out something new about it. So the way you do it is with the mashveh. Once I have a statement that Ruvain is an Adam, so then it'll produce that Ruvain is a Baal Chai. I hope that's clear. Okay, so the noda is the hagdama, he says, that we know the subject and predicate. Kol Adam Chai, all men are living things. The mavukash is the nosei asher yadata. You know a nosei called Ruvain. Utavakesh ladas nasu. You want to know, well, what predicate does he have? So what you do is you make a equation, a mashveh. Ki hagdama shabo tishave hanosei hamavukash lenosei hanoda. Let's go slowly on that. It's the premise that will equate the subject of the navukash to the subject of the known. So here is the mavukash is Ruvain, which is just 2 in this example, but this mashveh will make Ruvain equal to the subject called Adam. So once Ruvain is equal to the subject called Adam, then it'll be told it will be that Ruvain is a Baal Chai also. Okay, so is that clear?
Yeah, so in the example, the mavukash really is whether or not Ruvain is a Baal Chai.
That's correct.
So the Imkain hu Baal Chai, so the mashveh really is the words Imkain. Or maybe not, no, mashveh is just...
No.
Well, the mashveh is Adam.
Mashveh.
The word Adam is the mashveh. The word Adam is the mashveh. The word Ruvain is the mavukash. The word Adam is the mashveh.
Exactly. Since Ruvain is an Adam, since we can, this second term here tells us that Ruvain is located inside Adam.
So if you go back to the way he set it up, it makes more sense, because the first sentence is the noda. The next piece of information you're getting is actually the mavukash.
Exactly.
Which is the word Ruvain.
Exactly. That's a very interesting way that he described it. Normally we just think of 2 premises and a conclusion, but what he's trying to emphasize here is that conclusion is really a question. In other words, Ruvain, as you said, is Ruvain Baal Chai or not? And in the end of the Sefer, he's going to go through all his different bechinos with exactly that system. because really you want to know something about Ruvain. The only way you could do it is through a mashva that will put Ruvain into a given statement, into kol adam. Very interesting. Very good. Excellent. Good.
So you may want to move your gray. You may want to move your gray, the gray words around.
Well, no, this really is the mashva. Oh, except he comes. I didn't want to change the book. That's what he said in the book. So I just put the gray there just to.
But but he's not. He doesn't say. He, according to the way he's setting it up, I would think that he's saying. He says clearly that Ruvain, that the Muvukash is the last statement. Mkein hu balchai.
Well, it's not really the last statement. Ruvain is really, you see.
Really is Ruvain the Muvukash. The result of the Muvukash after you have the Hekesh is that Ruvain is a balchai.
I'm going to put this in.
I don't know if that's right or wrong, but...
Hold on, I'm going to put this here. And it's important that we get this because the whole end of the Sefer, when he starts explaining things, is going to be based on this understanding.
So you may want to make that gray also.
Yeah. I want to make this gray because we don't want to interfere that with the book. There we go. Okay. Now, the way he sets it up is that really Ruvain is the Mavukash. And this, that he's a Baal Chai,
is the result of the Hekesh.
Is the result of the Hekesh, that's right.
So he doesn't give us the word to describe that, though. He tells you the Noda, he tells you the Mashra, he tells you the Mavukash, but he doesn't tell you what do you call the result of the equation?
He says the result. He calls the result the Mavukash.
He calls the result the Mavukash because I thought the Mavukash is... Well, no, because the way he says Mavukash is when no say, Asher Yedato, Usavakish Ladas Nasula. The Mavukash, he explains, is the topic which you don't know its predicate.
Okay, let's know it. To spell it out.
Then you have your result.
Okay, let's see how he's actually going to spell all this out for us. Okay. So let's see how he does that. Okay. He says like this. Derech Mashal. He says, "Kol Adam Bal Chai." That's our original premise. Hu Hanoda. Why? Shiadata no so. You know the subject. Hu Adam. The Nasuo, and you also know the predicate that he's a living thing, Hu Bal Chai. Now, Ruvain Hu Bal Chai, he says clearly, that's the Mavukash. Shiadata no so, Hu Ruvain, because there you know the subject called Ruvain. Wow, look at this. Uvikashta ladas nos o im Hu Bal Chai. Wow. Let's see what he just did here. When he says Ruvain Hu Bal Chai, exactly. That's our what we would call our conclusion, correct?
Right.
Now the conclusion. This is how he talks about the conclusion. He says Ruvain is called the Mavukash. Shiadata no so. You know there's someone who's called Ruvain. Ruvain. Ubikashta, you requested Ladas no so, imhu Bal Chai. You wanted to know if he was a Bal Chai or not. And so he says Ruvain, that's called a Mavukash. Uruvain hu Adam, hu Hamashver, that's the equating term. Hu hamashva nosecha, v'hu Ruvain. It equates the subject, which is Ruvain, el noso hanoda, to the subject of the given term, v'hu Adam. So it's definitely the third term is the Mavukash. Okay. The only thing that's confusing you is he doesn't say the word he doesn't say the word tolda, and he uses it as if it's a question. And you want to say, well, it's a question, where's the answer? So he says the answer comes, the answer to the Mavukash comes when you do the mashve.
Right, that's the equation. When you add them together, or in this case, you're not adding. What you're doing is you're creating the A is B, if A equals B, and C equals B,
C, or C equals A,
or whatever. Then, right. Then that equals that. So once you say then, the less then everything comes together. That's what he's doing here.
Right. So I know it's confusing you because it confused me also. I mean, the simple way of learning is calling them the major, minor premises and the conclusion. That's the easiest way.
Right.
Right? This is the major premise because it's a categorical premise, called Adam Chai. And there's a minor premise, which is Reuven is an Adam, and then there's a conclusion. But he wants to emphasize the fact that we're discovering something about the subject Reuven in the last premise. That's what he wants to, and that's why it's a mavukash. It's true it's a result, but it's the thing the way he's looking at it, it's you really want to know something about Reuven, and you solve the problem by your noda and your mashve. Okay. Well, I think when we get to the end part of the sefer, where he goes through all these syllogisms, we're going to see the system used much more. Okay, but it's basically major, minor, and conclusion. But I think the point here is that the way he wants us to look at this is that the conclusion is something that we want to know, and the way we do it is we have a given premise, and we then take our subject that we want to know and we equate it to that subject of the given premise. Okay, the Seder. That's called the Shalom. And the reason why it's called Shalom is because it spells out the two premises that lead to the conclusion. The second version of the Hekesh is where one of the premises are going to be left out. And many times in common speech, this is what happens, and you have to really fill out the missing term, the missing premise. Let's see what he says. The Bilti Shalom hu sheyit hamubo echad min hagdamas hamolidos. The incomplete syllogism is where one of the premises that produce the consequence is left out. The Yabana Mishnei Mishnai Bovad, and you only see a premise and a conclusion. And he says that's the Yischalek Lepashut Markov. He has two different variations on that. One he calls the simple, and one is called the compound. What's the simple? The Pashut hu sheyesh lo shnei chalakim levad. Harishon nikra kodem v'hasheni nimshach. It only has two statements. The first is called the precedent, and the second one is called the consequent. Derech mashal. Now I put, of course, these letters into the text. They were not there. Okay. Hachachmos miyakros et adam imkein re'ui shetichamdena. Wisdom increases the value of a person, and therefore it should be desirable. We're going to go through this in a second. The second one is Mashi miyaker ha'adam rui shiyachakem shiyechamed imkein hachachmos rui shticho medna. What increases the value of a person should rightfully be desired. Therefore, wisdom should rightfully be desired. He's going to spell it out. V'tireh shahamashal harishon ne'elma bo hagdama harishona v'hashniya hashniya. Okay, now let's spell that out. Okay, really these are the same hekeshim but different premises were left out. In the first incomplete syllogism, only incomplete because it's not stated, this Hagdama was left out. Okay, I didn't want to write that in because I wanted to show that the full syllogism should read in both instances. Oops. Okay, the full syllogism should read Ma miyake es ha'adam re'ui sheyichamed hachachmos miyakros es ha'adam im ken re'ui shetichamedna. That's the full Hekesh. What increases the value of a person should be desired. Wisdom increases the value of the person. Therefore, it should be desired. Wisdom should be desired. But many times in speaking or in reading, all the premises are not spelled out. And you'll just get, well, wisdom increases a man's worth, and therefore it should be desired. So the first premise was unstated, but it really is necessary to be stated to understand the Hekesh in its completeness, in its entirety. Okay, in the second one, he just did the same thing, but he left out the second premise. Is that clear? What went on?
Yeah.
Basically, a lot of times, both premises are not stated. You only have either the major or the minor premise stated in the conclusion, because you're supposed to be able to fill in the other one.
Right.
Okay? Now, it's very important to always spell out those premises.
In other words, if the truth is that it's external logic, that something which is miyakar an adam is something one should desire. So from the first Hekesh, it's left out, but really it's sort of part of the logic of an individual that the preposition is there already. You know it. But you could still make the Hekesh because the logic is so simple that just by saying Adam and you don't have to say that you really you need to desire something that is going to increase the value of a person. So you could understand it, but he's saying that it's still lacking. It's not clear.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. If I said to you in this one, for instance, I said, well, all men are living things, and therefore Reuven has to be a living thing, right? So in your head, you put together, it must be that Reuven is another.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Or if we said, okay, all men, Reuven's a man, therefore Reuven is a living thing. Okay, so the major premise you have to put together, but it's very close. So many times in speech, we'll shorthand things by either cutting out the major premise or the minor premise.
Right. And we do this all the time. If I tell you in the morning, by the way, it's going to rain today, I don't have to tell you that therefore you should take your raincoat. You understand that yourself because that's just part of life. But there are certain times where if I tell you something, you wouldn't know how to handle it because you don't know the other information. And that's what he's dealing with over here, whether or not you know the major information or minor information in order to create the Hekesh. Sometimes you know it without telling it to you. Sometimes you don't.
Right. Right. But it's very important to spell that out. Okay, so he says here, those are the two types. So you have the Hekesh Shalom where all the premises are spelled out. And then the incomplete when one of the two major ones are spelled out. Okay? The major or the minor one is spelled out, not the other one. Now, what's called a murkav? That was a pashut. Right, that was the pashut. Now he has the murkav. The murkav yischalek l'shnayim. The rishon hu shehakodem shelo murkav nosim rabim v'nasu echad. The premise is going to be made up of a lot of subjects and only have one predicate. V'yesh mi sheyikruhu achipus. I think that's called induction in English. Here he says like this: Yayin eretz safat. Yayin eretz safat, eretz Italia, Eretz Ashkenaz, Eretz Sfarad, Eretz Turgamo, Mechamem. Im Kain, Kol Yayin Mechamem. The yayin of France, Italy, Ashkenaz, Germany, Spain, and I don't know where Turgama is, but whatever it is, all those different yayins warm up the person. So therefore, we can conclude that all yayin warms up the person. That's induction. Okay, so it may not be mukhrach, because you don't know all the wines in the world, and there may be one or two that don't. So it may be a hasty generalization. But normally, when we have a good sample, we can then create a categorical rule from it. Okay, that's called induction. Okay, so the second one, the Merkav Hasheni, hu sha'kodim Merkav minosim v'nosuim rabim mischalfim ze achazeh b'hadraga shenasu echad naseh noseh b'sheni. This compound one is where the premise is made up of many subjects and predicates that go down a chain where the subject of one, where the predicate of one and the subject of the second one switch. Let's look at the example. Kol Adam Bal Chai. Okay, now we're going to put the Bal Chai in the first position. Bal Chai Margish. Kol Margish Guf Chai. Kol Guf Chai Morkav. Therefore, Kol Adam Morkav. Okay, that's a string of Hekashim. So since A is B and B is C and C is D and D is E, then A has to be E, right? If all men are living things and all living things feel and all feeling things are living bodies and all living bodies are made up of compounds, so then man is made up of a compound of elements, okay? So that he explains there to Funos that the Chachamim speak in a very brief way, and our job is to reconstruct all the premises that led to this conclusion, because since they're talking at an expert level, a lot of the premises are supposed to be understood, but you have to spell them out in order to explain them clearly. So you have to go from the conclusion and work backwards to all the premises that were needed to produce that conclusion. So that's what he calls the Merkav. And the string can go for a long, long distance. Now we'll talk about the Hekesh HaTanai.
So the Merkav Hasheni is
Hekesh HaTanai, yeah.
It's just really connecting. It's really categorical in a way, because saying that Adam is a Bal Chai, so he's included in that category, and a Bal Chai is included in the category of Margish. Margish is a Guf Chai, Guf Chai is a Merkav, so that means that a person essentially is included in that category.
Right. Now it doesn't have to be categorical. I could say if A then B, and if B then C, and if C then D, and if D then E, therefore if A, therefore E, right? If it's raining, the streets are wet. If the streets are wet, you can slip and fall. If you can slip and fall, you should be careful. Therefore, if it's raining, you should be careful.
Right.
Okay. So, but these things are simple, but they're very important concepts, because when you try to spell out the chain, that's where the difficulties come, and that's where you'll have machlokas. It's not so simple. What led us to the conclusion? And a lot of people, when they read quickly, think they're understanding, and they're getting a general idea of something, but they don't understand completely because they're not aware of all the premises that led us to that conclusion. And a lot of times those things will be machlokas. Okay, so that's the Tanai. The Tanai is the if then, right? Okay. Even the Merkav, I said, I don't think it has to be categorical. It just means that it's made up of the whole chain. Okay. The Tanai, who told Allah, munachas betanai shetunach barishona. Okay, he says the Tanai is our typical if-then, and it means that the result is predicated on a certain condition that was mentioned in the antecedent. Okay, in the if clause. So here's the example. Im ha'adam bal chai, if, then hu margish, then he feels. Ach ha'adam vadai shehu bal chai, since A is definitely true, that Adam is a bal chai, therefore he definitely feels. Okay, if A then B, given A, therefore B. All right, simple Hekesh Tolui. We call it Hekesh Tolui in the other sefer. Okay, now this could also, I said, can be Merkav. It doesn't have to be. It could just be, as I said, if A then B, then B then C. But this is an if they. There's people also that want to take that will tell you just very interesting point here. Then we came to the simple Hekesh, Kol Adam Chai, Ruvain Adam, and Imke Ruvain Hubal Chai. You could take any of the classical Hekeshes and make it into an if-then. If the two premises are true, therefore, the conclusion is true, right? If Kol Adam is Bal Chai and Ruvain is an Adam, then Ruvain is a Bal Chai. If you notice, that's how he calls those conclusion in Cain, which means therefore. But you could just say that this is an if and that's a then. But okay, that's neither here nor there. Okay, Viseda. So that's called an if then. The third one is based on the Hekesh Machalik, and that's the A or B one, okay? If A, then B. A is either B or C. If it's B, it's not C, and if it's C, it's not A. And if it's not B, it's A, and the reverse is true also. A Hekesh Machalik, he's going to explain all the variations, but now he's just giving the formats of them. The Hekesh Machalik, Shagdamaso Harishona Michulekes B'mila O. Its first premise is divided with the word or. Okay? And that's it. V'yunach echad mina hachalakim v'yuchash hasheni. Once you affirm one of the halakim, then you're going to be denying the second halak. Right? A or B. If I affirm A, then I deny B. Because that's what the statement says, either A or B. Derech mashal. Akshev hu yom o laila. Amnam yom hu. Im kain ein o laila. It's now either day or night. In truth, it's day. So therefore, it's not night. Or Akshav hu yom o laila. Amnam yom eino. Im kain hu laila. Now it's either day or night. It is not day, therefore it is night. Okay? So the first one, what he did was affirm one of the parts. I say A or B. Given A, I can conclude not B. Or given B, I can conclude not A. That's an affirmation of one of the two parts. The second one is where he denies one of the two parts. A or B. Well, if it's not A, then it must be B. Or if it's not B, it must be A. Okay? So that's the typical Hekesh Machalik. Clear?
Yeah, that's
Now,
that's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
okay. So we'll go to the next chapter. Here he's going to tell us Shimush HaHekesh. Actually, how do you use Hekeshim? Some very interesting Chidushim here, because again, what we're trying to do is to bring to a conscious level things that we do unconsciously. So he says like this, Ad Heina Ba'arnu Hekeshim Atzmam. Up to this point, we explained what a Hekesh is, the foundations of them, the various types of them. Now I want to tell you how they're used. So he says, the Hekesh has two purposes, two ways that it's used. One is lechadesh hamuskal, to create new ideas, and the second one is going to be lahamid gezer al amito. It's going to be used to establish a statement, establish whether a statement is true, that a statement is true. So one, it's going to mechadesh, to tell us, you're going to use a hekesh to create new ideas. And the second one is we have a statement, we're going to use the hekesh to be used as a proof. Okay? So let's see how he spells that out. Perisho. Kihine keshigiu el sechlecha shtei hagdamos harishonos, when two statements come to your mind, me'alav yizbonem sechlecha v'yakish v'yolid hatolda. Then the consequence of hearing those two statements automatically will create a result. Va'az yetze lecha muskal chadash. From those two statements, putting them together, you're going to get a new concept that was included in the two statements, but you never knew them before. Derech mashal. Kesher isa she'over lefanecha sel echad. You see a shadow pass by. Hine miyad yisporelecha she'over sham guf echad. So now you know that there was some man there. All you saw was a shadow, but immediately in your mind, oh, there must be a man there. That's why you duck when you see the shadow of a wall or something. Okay, but anyway, that's the point. But really what you're doing at the speed of light is making a hekesh. Kitakesh v'tomar, you'll say, Ein sel ella b'makom sheyesh guf. There's no shadow without a body. Kan over sel, a shadow has just passed. Im kain, kan over guf. So it must be that a physical body has passed also. And you do that at the speed of light. And he just took a very common example and spelt it out as a hekesh. And this is the problem with thinking, because we think very quickly. We don't stop sometimes to consider exactly how we got to our conclusions. Okay? So that's what he says here. Kiyotzi b'zeh, and all other types of examples. V'zehu hashimush harishon shel hekesh. This is the first use of a hekesh. That's the mechadish ideas. You see one idea happening, that the shadow passed. You put it together with the concept that you know that all goofs have shadows, and therefore you conclude, wow, there must be a goof there. There must be some sort of physical body there. That's mechadish. Because you really never saw a physical body. All you saw was a shadow, right? Never saw a physical body. But you know, since each shadow has to have a physical body, that the physical body has to be there also. So you machadish something that you couldn't see even. Nevazeshimush harishon shel hekesh, ach hashimush hasheni keshetirtza la'am'et mama shetomar as tishamesh min hekesh. The second use of a hekesh is to prove a statement is true. Derech mashal. Ma'amar sheru'i sheyeh ika hishtadluso shel adam al Torah. You have a statement that says the main strivings of a man should be in Torah. Well, now say you want to prove that statement. So he says you'll do it by creating the following hekesh. Ika hishtadluso shel adam roi sheyeh lamashu hayoter tovlo. The primary strivings of a man should be for that which produces the greatest good for him. HaTorah hi mashu hayoter tov la'adam. The Torah is the thing which is the greatest, gives man the greatest benefit. Im kain ika hishtadluso shel adam roi sheyeh al HaTorah. Therefore, the primary strivings of a man should be in Torah. So we had a statement, and we created the two premises that were going to lead to that result. We wanted to prove that ika hishtadluso shel adam sh'rui Torah. So we looked for two premises that would produce that result. And the first premise was that the ika hishtadluso shel adam rui sheyeh yoter tov lo, which is going to be the subject of the Mevukash. Right? We said what the essential strivings of man should be, and he was Achidish, it should be for the things that best benefit him. So once we know that, then we have the Chiddush that the Torah is the thing which gives man the most benefit, and then we can get our Mevukash statement. Right? The striving should be for the Torah. It's very, very essential stuff here. So that's, and again at the end of the Sefer, when he's going to go through all these different bechinot and all these different hekeshim, he's going to use the hekeshim to do these two things, to machadish new ideas and also to show you how to bring proofs. But here he's just presenting the information. Now, he says, Hamitas Gezerah, now there's two ways that you can prove a statement true. This is, again, stuff that we did with Derek Tfunos. O Adidei Hekesh HaYashar. One way is called the Hekesh HaYashar. And the second one is Adidei Hekesh HaChiluf. There's the direct and the indirect way of proving something true. We'll spell them out. HaHekesh HaYashar hu Hekesh Shehagamaso Tivoled Hatolda Shinavakesh Lamita. The Hekesh HaYashar is where the premises produce the statement that you wanted to prove true, like the example that we gave above. We wanted to prove the ika hishtadluso shel adam roi sheyeh al Torah. We found two Hagdamot that produced that result. That's called the direct way of proving a statement. You produce two statements that lead to its result. What's the indirect way of doing it? It's the Hekesh HaChiluf. Hu Hekesh al Chiluf HaGezerah Shinavakesh La'amet. What you do is you take the opposite of the statement, and you're going to show that that opposite statement is going to prove, is going to come to a false conclusion. Okay, let's see how he spells that out. HaHekesh HaChiluf hu HaHekesh al Chiluf HaGezerah Shinavakesh La'amet. You take the conclusion that you want, and you say, okay, let's take the opposite of that conclusion. Shehagdamasav tivale tolda mufersemis kozev. And if I take the opposite of my statement, I'll show you, when I use it as a premise, that it'll produce a obviously false result. Va'az nishpatios gezeraso amitos. And therefore, since the opposite was proven false, it must be that my statement is true. He's going to spell that out. Derech mashal, he's going to Haya memra sha'olam chudash. You want to prove that the world was created. It wasn't. This is an old philosophical question. Did the world always exist, or was it created? So you want to prove that the world was created. Vaharaya mitos nema. What type of proof are you going to give? You take the opposite. What's the opposite of it wasn't created? It doesn't mean. It means that it was always here. There was no creator. It was always here. That's called kadmon. Kadmon. It's always here. So if it was kadmon, then you're going to show from this hekesh that's going to lead to a false result in the following way. Kol mashu kadmon iyafshar lo hishtanot. Everything that is without creation, which means primary, it wasn't created itself, can't change. Ha'olam hu kadmon. You'll want to say that the world is kadmon. It never changed. It never was created. In Kain ha'olam eino mishtana. So therefore, it should never change. We see that the world is constantly changing, so it can't be kadmon. What does kadmon mean? It means the always create, always in existence. Things, if it's always in existence, it shouldn't change. Okay. Anyway, that's what we do. We say we want to prove that Ruvain is a man. So we say, well, let's prove Ruvain is not a. Let's take the statement Ruvain is not a man. Well, if Ruvain is not a man, then he shouldn't have an American passport. Okay. So he does have an American passport. So it can't be that he's not a man. If A, then B, and if B is false, then A has to be false. Excuse me. You want to prove A true, so you say the opposite of A, not A, and you say if not A, then B has to be true. B is not true. If A, then B. B is not true, then A has to be not true. If A is not true, then if not A is not true, then A has to be true. So here he goes. V'hine hatolda hazos miforsemes koze. The fact that the world is constantly changing is obviously hatolda hazos miforsem koze. The fact that the world is not changing is obviously false. Because we see that the world is constantly changing. And kain muchra shamayim olam kadmon yeh sheker v'hu mechudash emes. So it must be that kadmon is sheker, because we said if it's kadmon, then it shouldn't change. We see it's changed. It can't be kadmon. If it's not kadmon, the opposite of kadmon is mechadesh. Okay.
Right,
That's
so this is good as long as, as long as you agree with the premises.
Yes, exactly.
Today, some of the evolutionists may argue and say that even if the world was kadmon, it could still change. But I guess in those times they didn't yet get there.
We will not bring up the evolutionists because I could give you a nice whole talk on the evolutionists who belong in mental institutions.
Okay.
I'll tell you one little thing, just one little thing I just came across. It turns out that the DNA, when it makes mutations, it makes anything, the result of DNA is never anything new. The way you get a short horse from long horses is by taking away the gene that produces the long horse, and the opposite. In other words, if you think about it deeply, it has to be that way. That there's no power in the physical world that can create yesh miyayin, right?
Right.
It's impossible. So the DNA happens to have all the structures that are possible, and the only thing is variation within the species. You never see a horse turn into a frog. You can see a big horse and a little horse, a short horse and a fat horse. You can see a brown horse and a yellow horse, but you can never see a horse turn into a frog, because that would require a chiddush in the genetic structure, and there's no way that a physical thing can make a chiddush. So anyway, that's just one of the
Right.
the bombshell kashas that knocked them out of the window anyway. But they've been knocked out a long way. I mean, this theory was really because they didn't want to say the word God, so they created a theory that doesn't have the word God in it. But it's absolutely ridiculous in light of, I mean, that maybe in 1884, when Darwin was around, wherever it was, people could think that a monkey can turn into a man.
Right.
But once we know the structure of DNA, we see that you can't. Nothing new can be created from DNA. It's only a question of whatever's there has to be eliminated to make the other gene prominent. Anyway, it's very. Also, the fact is that what happens is he went to these islands and he saw strange creatures and where'd they come from. So he said, well, they must have been developed from the creatures that we know. But he didn't understand DNA. And also what he didn't understand was that when any creature develops, it can't develop in isolation. It has to develop in relationship to the food chain and to the environment. So it's not that it has to change. The whole
environment around it has to change, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's really it's a silly theory by people who just don't want to believe in a Kodesh Baruch Hu creating the world, but it doesn't make any sense. They say even statistically, for anyway, there's just millions and millions of proofs against it. It's a silly system just because people just went to museum and saw these pictures that they say the pictures are a proof. The pictures are not proof of anything.
Right.
It just doesn't. It's just a false picture. But anyway, that's my little quick discussion on DNA and the theory of evolution.
Right. So
okay, don't get me started. Okay,
we'll have to do that some other time. But yeah. But right now that came up because this premise that if it was cadmium, it would not change. Okay.
Right. Okay. Well, that we have to get into because really, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does cadmon mean? I don't. I think cadmon means that there was no creator.
Right. Right.
And there has to be a premise that the creator can't change, because if it's changeable, then it's not the creator. But you have to, again, figure out what those premises mean. I'm with you. But to say, though, whatever it is,
the logic makes sense once you take the premises here.
Exactly. And the important thing is to understand the structure of the logic.
Right.
And the second important thing is to fill out all the statements that the logic is based on, the hagamas, the premises. And then the third step is to say why is each premise true or not, on what basis. On what basis is the premise true? Okay? So then once you've done that, you've clearly stated your argument. Okay. Now, whether there'll be a machlokus, whether those premises are true or not, or whether you're right, like in the Gemara, right? He learns darshan's the pasuk one way, he darshan's the pasuk the other way. They're arguing what the pasuk means. But once you darshan what it means, then you'll come to those conclusions.
Right.
Okay. So we'll stop here, and next week, Bezrat Hashem, we'll do Stiras HaHekesh. We're moving right along. We're coming very